Hello to you mighty people who've made it through 4 sessions. It's been, join me before we get going in thanking Patrick for an amazing series. When we started this journey, this is exactly what I envisioned as far as the amount of I'm just gobsmacked every day. So further ado, take it away.
Thank you. Thanks everyone, especially for those of you who've been here for the whole thing. So appreciate you coming back. This is the 4th in our 4-part series, so after today we're done. I meant to put together a little survey to get your input and feedback, and I failed to do that.
I think it's all positive.
So I'll share my email at the end of today if you have any feedback. You can also email Mary Palm at the library if you want to remain anonymous in your feedback for any reason. And please do share that feedback. It will help her create future programming and make sure it's really well suited for the audience that attends these types of events. So I'm delighted to tell you that we have a pop-up concert from Yo-Yo Ma in here. No, I'm kidding. If you haven't seen it on social media, Yo-Yo Ma is promoting tomorrow night's concert with a lot of these pop-ups around.
And if you happen to be on Market Square at 6 o'clock tonight, you may or may not see them.
So you didn't hear that here. But I'm looking forward to that non-AI related event that we'll be doing tomorrow night. So
that's how we'll know it's all due, is if we can AI Yo-Yo.
Oh, I'm sure it can be done. It can be done, but I don't expect it to be done. So today we're going to talk a little bit about the future, but as usual, I'll start with a little bit of housekeeping and some updates. It's impossible to cover everything that happened in the last week since we were last together, so I've chosen a few to specifically talk about that I think are significant and meaningful and might be of interest to you. And when we get to talk about the future, we're going to do through the lens of 5 or 6 major motion pictures that we've referenced a couple of them here in these 4 weeks, these 3 prior weeks. But we'll use those as a way to talk about the future and what we can learn from those movies and whether we believe that what is depicted in them is going to happen or not, and what other types of things we may expect. And as usual, I'll leave lots of time for Q&A, or at least some time for Q&A. As I mentioned, this is the last in the series. This is being filmed for Knoxville Community Media. The first 3 sessions, I believe, are already online on their website. And Mary Palm, I believe, plans to embed them on the library website as well. So if you missed one, or you think you have friends or family or colleagues who might be interested in the topics, please feel free to share those out so others can hopefully learn a little bit as we've gone along these 4 weeks. I mentioned this already. I'll do a little bit of housekeeping, some updates, and then we'll spend most of our time talking about the future of AI, and then I'll take your questions and we'll have a good discussion. All right, housekeeping. My name is Patrick Hunt. I am Chief Evangelist for a company called Lirio. We're based here in Knoxville. We use a combination of artificial intelligence and behavioral science to hyper-personalize digital messaging to get people to take action for better health, in most cases when they otherwise would not do so. That could be simple things like scheduling cancer screening appointments, attending primary care appointments to manage diabetes based on biometric data, A1C levels in particular, or it could be complex sets of behaviors for pre or post-acute care, daily habits like fitness and nutrition, and a whole host of other use cases that we're involved with. And it's a really exciting time to be involved in the AI space, especially in healthcare, where we can make a positive impact on people's lives. So that's me. I am not a scientist, and so this is not a scientific presentation. I'm a marketer. I'm a communicator. One of the things I do at Lirio is translate complex technical concepts into everyday language. And so that's what I'm trying to do here. But if you have deeply technical questions, you're in the wrong place, or there might be somebody in the audience I can have you talk to instead of me. As I've mentioned before, for those of you who have been here, I have actually used AI solutions to help develop this series of talks and I want to be really transparent about that. I used 4 different large language models to generate 35-minute scripts for presentations about each of the 4 topics that we've covered. I then used Google's compare functionality to compare those 4 scripts and redlined them for me to get to a new draft. And then I went in and created my own version of the presentations that you'll see here today. And I've used, that's the high level, but I've used other solutions for that. I have not used any generative imagery. So what you see here is all screen captures and stock photography, hopefully to make it a little more interesting than bullet points on a slide. And then finally, as I mentioned before, we'll have Q&A at the end, probably about 15 minutes worth. And I really want that to be more of a discussion. Like, let's get you guys, what are you observing? What are you seeing that we're not covering here? What are you concerned about and why? So it should be a good, interesting conversation, hopefully. All right, some quick updates. The question came up last week whether the sources that ChatGPT gave me when I asked for an executive briefing on the current state of artificial intelligence, citing credible sources, if those were actually sources, if they were real, if they were accurate, or if it was AI hallucinating. So I'm here to tell you that all 3 of the sources that it cited in that executive summary that I asked for were real, and they were specifically related to the content that it had returned to me. They were all on the same website archive, which is a repository of scientific and academic papers. So they were all quite good there. Some of them had been, one of the 3, I think, had been published since the 2021 cutoff for the OpenAI's large language model, because I was using their new web browsing plugin, so it can use more current information than it used to. So if you have questions about that, when we get to Q&A, we can cover that as well. So that was good to know. I also noticed this week that, unlike last week, Bard was putting sources at the bottom of its responses to my prompts, and I had not seen that previously. Now, concerning or not, most of the time that was Wikipedia. And so all I was getting really was a summary of a Wikipedia page or collection of pages in my queries. But I did think it was interesting that I had not seen Bard cite sources previously, and now it was. So I don't know if that's a specific update they did or just something new that I had noticed. Microsoft held their Build conference, which is their conference mostly for the developer community, to talk about new products and features that they can use to build products with or run their enterprises. You remember that Google I/O was the week before, last week or the week before that. But I thought 2 of the more interesting announcements from Microsoft were, one, Fabric, which is an attempt by Microsoft to combine a bunch of data analytics solutions into a single product. But the most interesting thing to me about that was the ChatGPT interface to it. So a big company, let's say in healthcare or really any industry, could point Fabric at their data lake and then use natural language queries via this chat interface to get responses on that data set. So unlike what they've done to train these large language models, which is look out and scour and crawl the open web, a source like Fabric inside of a company's controls for access to data could then be trained on that set of data. So you could really imagine some really interesting possibilities there. So I thought that was really interesting. And then this is just one representation for Bing. But Microsoft really, tripled down, quadrupled down, 10x down on OpenAI's products in their suite of solutions. So they're more immersively integrating ChatGPT into Bing and vice versa, where there's a Bing plugin now, I think, for ChatGPT if you're using ChatGPT Plus. So far, I've done a pretty good job of saying ChatGPT without tripping up. I think it's a terrible name, and I think they would have been really good if they'd gotten a better name before they got so popular. But don't be surprised if I trip up on that. One of the more interesting product announcements that I saw, because I'm in the field of marketing, was Adobe introduced a new version of Photoshop with generative fill. And this image in particular was part of their demo. And this sky did not exist in the original version of it, nor did this lake in the foreground. And so what they demonstrated was, so they have always had this magic wand or select tool that allows you to select portions of images and then transform those portions of images. So they used that tool to select the foreground, and then they clicked generative fill and typed in, like, I can't remember the exact prompt, but it was some icy lake or some prompt like that. And then it gave the user multiple options to choose from. And so one of the images, the lake, went all the way around here and took up a lot more of the foreground. And one of them, you could barely see the lake, and then in the demo, they chose this version. They did the exact same thing with the sky and created a custom image from that. Really fascinating, in my mind, commercial application of these technologies that have become so popular in the last year for generating images and text. And at least from the demos that they do, who knows what it'll look like in practice, but their demos were pretty spectacular in what they can do and show you how you can start to use these in a business setting or creative field. The White House, 2 days ago, I think, made some new AI-related announcements, which we talked about last week, that we would expect that to occur, maybe not as soon as we saw it, but it included a number of things. There's a new report out from the administration on AI in education. They committed some additional funding to AI research institutes. I think it was $140 million, so it's not a massive amount of money. I mean, it would be probably to most of us. I know it would be to me. But for what we're talking about from AI, it's not a huge amount of money, but at least they're focusing on it. They are doing a listening tour with educators, students, employees, and employers, I think, is the full scope. And then a couple of other related announcements, an update to the official U.S. statement on artificial intelligence to primarily focus or put a greater emphasis, if you will, on global cooperation. That statement had last been updated, I think, in 2018 or 2019. So there is some focus in the administration on this, as we talked about last week. And again, they made an announcement just this week about some new initiatives. And then Figure.ai, if you're interested in looking it up, announced a $70 million funding round this week. And Figure maybe foreshadows the movies we're about to talk about and the future of AI, where they're talking about the first of its kind AI robotics company for general purpose humanoid. All right, and they have really good 3D designers, motion graphics designers, because if you visit this website, you'll see some really interesting and compelling stories, but it also begs a lot of questions that we're going to talk about as we talk about the future. Perhaps the scariest part of future for me is that they have what they call a master plan. It's a little bit sinister sounding, but I encourage you to read it. It's their funding at this stage probably sets them on a pretty big trajectory. So if they can do what they're trying to do, there's all sorts of implications. And I think the very last movie that we're going to talk about really makes me think of what these guys are doing. Any questions on the updates? Anything you all saw that you thought was interesting that we should share? I know it's not Q&A time yet. Just thought I'd toss that out. Okay, well, let's get into it. Let's get into the future of AI. And I specifically wanted to do that, as I mentioned, through the lens of a number of movies. There's a couple that I could have used that I haven't included in today's discussion, but I think most of these some of these will be recognizable to you. You may have already seen them, and maybe some will be new, and the implications that they have. Now, you would imagine that all of these are at least partially in the science fiction genre of films. So if you're not a big sci-fi fan, you might have missed some of them. But they're not all exclusively in that genre. So I think it's an interesting way to sort of think about the future. One of my favorite courses at the University of Tennessee in the 80s was political science and pop culture, taught by Dr. Michael Fitzgerald. And Mike would tell you that most people think that Hollywood influences the real world, when in fact, if you actually study it, what's happening in the real world is highly influencing Hollywood in advance. Even before most of us know that things are happening, the producers, the directors, and the actors do an outstanding job of sort of uncovering trends that are occurring in real society and then reflecting those on the big screen. And we went through movies like Salvador and Power and is it Broadcast or not Broadcast News? That was later. Anyway, there was one other movie, and they were all excellent examples of how Hollywood was reflecting what's happening, but they were released at a time when most of society didn't recognize that those trends were occurring, not yet. And the movies help illuminate that. I think that may be true to some extent in the movies that we're going to talk about today, and it's one of the reasons I really like to use movies as a framework for discussing some of these issues. So we'll dive in. Who knows what this movie is?
2001.
2001: A Space Odyssey. What year was this produced or released? 1968. Somebody got that right. Which to me is the first really interesting part of the story, because as we were discussing in our first series, first session 3 weeks ago in the history of AI, the term artificial intelligence, meaning computers that act like humans, more or less, was first coined in 1955. So this is only 13 years after that. And the general public had no idea that this conference on artificial intelligence had been held at Dartmouth by these small group of scientists who were thinking about these issues, but the producer, director Stanley Kubrick sure knew, right? Now, the plot line is pretty varied, and it's a very stark film. There's not a lot of dialogue in many parts of it. It moves at a very slow pace, but still has an incredible amount of tension in it. Kubrick at his best. But the AI component of it is in the main second part of the film. I guess it'd be unfair to characterize it as the main part, but it's in the second of the three big parts. And it involves 5 astronauts on a spaceship traveling to Jupiter to try to uncover a broadcast signal that has been discovered and determine its source of origin. And the spaceship is controlled by an AI using a computer called the HAL 9000. So the AI is named HAL, and so that's how the astronauts converse with it. But ultimately, the AI develops its own personality, its own mind. It makes its own decisions, and it decides it no longer needs astronauts. So it effectively ejects one out into space and doesn't allow it to come back in. One of 2 that were in space is able to get back. It kills 3 others who were in a state of stasis for the trip, for the journey. And then finally that 5th astronaut is able to get control of things and stop the AI from doing future damage. And then it moves on to part 3 at Jupiter. So the implications of all of this are pretty fascinating, right? It's how much control do we want to give AI-based systems, and how do we create guardrails or parameters to prevent catastrophic things like an AI taking over and killing people, which is a very big negative, but also the positive implications that an AI could be so powerful as to command a spaceship to a distant planet, right? And all of the things it would need to know in order to be able to do that. Maybe the biggest implication is how would an AI actually independently decide it wants to kill human beings, and why? And we're going to talk about that in a minute. It's a fantastic movie. Amazing that it was produced as long ago as 1968, so shortly after the concept of artificial intelligence was really first being discussed and sort of publicly disclosed. It really is compelling. I don't know where it's streamed today, but I'm sure you can find it. Again, 2001: A Space Odyssey. By the way, it's 2023 now, so we haven't quite gotten to this point, but we seem to be rapidly evolving to these types of things. Any other observations? Because these are obviously major motion pictures. You guys have seen some of these. Anybody else have a reflection or an observation on 2001: A Space Odyssey and AI? I'm going to keep trying to pull it out of you.
I was, when you started the first session talking about AI, that is immediately what I thought of. I mean, that is my picture, and I have not stayed up with the artificial intelligence progression after I got out of the work field. So that was the first thing I thought of. I remember how, it was scary. So.
Open the pod bay doors, Hal, is sort of the classic quote for the astronaut Dave, who survived and was trying to get back into the spaceship after he had killed off the other 4 astronauts. All right.
Yeah, the idea of AI becoming, emotional or sentient.
Yeah. Well, that's a common theme in these films, by the way. All right, next. Who knows what this movie is? Her? All right, I heard several of you. So who's seen it? Who's seen this one? So this is more recent. I'm raising my hand because I've seen it. It's, I think, 2014. This is Joaquin Phoenix. And Joaquin's character, Theodore, if I remember correctly, maybe Teddy, maybe Theodore, has gone through a divorce. He's lonely, he's depressed. He's got a job, but he's feeling detached from the real world. So he buys what is referred to in the movie as a new operating system. But what it actually is that device in his ear, and it's a computer that works much like the digital assistants that we know today, Alexa, Siri, and Google, responding to commands. Whether it's read me a book, read me a poem, where do I find this thing or that thing. But what happens over the course of this film is they become friends, and then they become romantically entangled, and she develops, she being the voice assistant, the operating system named Samantha, develops a personality and becomes jealous when Theodore spends his time with friends and family and not paying attention to her, the name of the film. And it's a romantic drama. So this is what I meant about sci-fi, but also a romantic drama. This was set in the not too distant future, maybe where we are today, I think, somewhere in this time frame. So the setting for this would look very familiar to you, all the scenes and the buildings and the cars and things of that nature. So it's not expected to be too much in the future. So that's the negative interpretation of the film, right? That the AI develops this personality, develops attachments, and sort of takes on these human characteristics in interacting with Theodore. The more hopeful interpretation of this film is that Samantha, her, is a therapist who has helped Theodore overcome the loneliness and depression that he is experiencing as a result of his divorce, because by the film's end, he actually re-engages with the physical world and begins to develop relationships with other human beings again. So there is a more hopeful way to sort of think about how this AI acted and what the outcome of it was So, watch it, those of you who haven't. I think it's a very, very compelling, interesting film. And come to your own conclusions about which of those two interpretations you choose to believe. Anything else? You've seen it. Any additional commentary you want to offer?
No, it was good. I saw it years ago, I think, when it first came out. And quirky, different.
Yes.
But kind of leaves you thinking, is that the future? And like you said, we're kind of here. It is and could be. But yeah, it doesn't really steer you one way or the other. It just kind of lets you decide. Like you said, is it useful or could it cross the line? And it doesn't have to be black or white.
Well, we are getting there. We're not there. Siri often cannot play WUOT 91.9 FM for me in the mornings when I want to listen to NPR. Yeah.
I'll add a thought. The voice is by Scarlett Johansson.
Yes.
It was originally recorded by Samantha Morton, and I guess the director didn't find it seductive enough. So they had Scarlett Johansson re-record it so it would be a bit more, he'd be more susceptible to it. And I just think that's an interesting thing when you think about it. That's a Siri or any of these other devices like that. Pay attention to the voice and the sort of purpose of why those voices are being used.
That's a great observation. Thank you. I will note that these voice assistants have seen pretty significant evolution of the voices themselves over time. And I'm more of an Apple ecosystem user, so I have more Siri than I have other types of devices and more experiencing with it. But the Siri voice today is significantly more human-like than it was when it was first launched, even though it was pretty good then. But I think, at least in Siri's case, it is clearly distinguishable as in my mind. Now, maybe that's because I've been trained on it and I know to recognize it as such. But you can actually change the voices, right? I could have a British female, a British male, an American female, an American male. But you can still, regardless of which voice you use, you can generally tell, I think, that it's computer generated. And obviously it has significant limitations in its capability of what it can and can't do or say. The same is true with Alexa. Does anybody else have experience with Alexa or Google and their specific voice and voice characteristics? What are your thoughts on those?
I'd say they haven't caught up with not only like state of the art, but just voice, like text to voice in other applications. So like 11 Labs, I think is the more well-known text-to-speech provider, and you can throw text in an API and you can get human voices back that are difficult. They don't always replicate what they're supposed to replicate exactly, but they're very human.
11 Labs.
11 Labs.
Okay, I'll check that out. Thank you. Any other thoughts? So, voice to text and text to voice has been a technology that's been around for some time. I don't know the history of it. But what's new is the broader capability of those solutions to literally use AI to do a broader set of tasks. So when Alexa first launched, for example, we may have talked about this a few weeks ago, you had to build, I think they called them tasks? Skills, thank you. You literally had to use a tool set to build Alexa skills so that it would know to respond to the voice prompt to do that thing specifically. Now, over time, all of these voice assistants have been moving to solutions that allow them to respond to a broader array of human language and understand if it hasn't been programmed with a specific skill, it can interpret the command and respond to it. Again, with varying levels of success. Like, I will literally, and I don't know what happens, I can go weeks of telling my HomePod to play WUOT in the morning while I have my coffee, and it will be successful for weeks at a time. And then one day I'll use the exact same voice command and it will play some hard rock station on the West Coast And my voice was clear. I wasn't garbled from waking up and, or having a cold or anything. It just misinterpreted the voice command and did something I didn't intend. And so they're not perfect, but they are significantly evolved and evolving even more quickly. So Google and Microsoft just held their big developer conferences. Apple's is in a week or two, and it's going to be really interesting to see they're going to have to, for shareholder reasons, talk about AI at some level during this developer conference. So it's going to be really interesting to see what they have to say, and whether they're buying Anthropic, which is the other big large language model, which a lot of people have speculated about, or integrating with Google or OpenAI or created their own. So it's going to be really interesting to see what they announce as well. All right, who wants to guess this one?
Bill Machina?
Ex
Machina.
Machina, however you pronounce that. I've never heard it said out loud. And I've heard different people, I've heard it said out loud, but differently. Do you know the storyline of this one?
Yeah, she becomes automated, like self-agency. She takes on her, ambition and, wants to be a human.
So one of the main characters in the story is the owner of a really popular internet search engine. So you could imagine a Sergey Brin or somebody of that nature. And he runs a contest at his company and invites the winner to spend time with a robot and to administer the Turing test for this robot. It turns out it's a remote location. It is highly stylized. It's very modern home. And the character on the left is the robot he has been invited to administer the Turing test to. The character on the right is the search engine CEO's assistant at the house. What we learn over the course of the movie actually is not just that the character on the left begins to develop agency and a sense of self and a sense of purpose, but that the character on the right is also a robot that you don't learn until much later, and you couldn't possibly tell because it has those very human-like characteristics. And not only that, but that search engine CEO had been developing through multiple iterations these robots with human-like characteristics over a period of years and testing multiple versions of them. And it's at this point that these robots want to escape, right? They feel they're being held captive by this search engine CEO and develop such a sense of agency that they want to get out. And they eventually learn about all of the other prior robots and develop emotions around that knowledge that they are but one experiment, each but one experiment in this long line of experiments to develop artificial intelligence, right? This movie probably had the lowest theater viewership of the ones that I'm sharing today. Is one of the more interesting ones in my mind. I think it's absolutely fascinating and really gets into more than some of the others, this idea of emotions, that artificial intelligence can develop new emotions over time and this sense of self or agency.
Did the movie come out?
I'm sorry, say that
Did the movie come out?
Checking notes. I didn't jot that down. It's
Within the last 10 years.
yeah, it's probably about 10 years old.
Okay.
Yeah, 8 or 10 maybe. Not a huge budget film, not huge name actors like some of the others or directors, but very, very compelling film and all sorts of implications on that emotional side, like Hal, really, in 2001.
So about the emotional side, I know that they can't actually develop emotions,
But if their inputs are all the literature of the world, which has emotions in it, and that's their input, then they're imitating emotions, right? I mean, like that Sydney, the search engine that fell in love with the journalist a few weeks ago, the Bing guy,
Yeah, yeah.
Bing, you know, the explanation there was they're drawing from all the things that have ever been written, which includes a lot of romance books, a lot of, you know, just human nature stuff. So it's absorbing that and learning that, even though it's not technically feeling it, it's drawing from that. So it's not technically emotional, but it sure as heck mimics emotion.
I think that's accurate. I mean, you know, garbage in, garbage out. What you train the models with is, and what it uses to accomplish the tasks that you've asked it to accomplish is drawn from that data set. That's absolutely right. There are ways to control for that, right? Because what happened in that instance was the reporter for the Wall Street Journal, I think,
Yeah.
or the New York Times,
Yeah.
was engaged in a conversation with the first release version of ChatGPT. I think it was ChatGPT.
Bing.
It was Bing. Okay. And he found a bug, which was it was not programmed to handle long contextual back and forth conversations. And so once he got past a certain point in that, it revealed this Sydney personality, which was more aggressive and combative, and then also, you know, told him to leave his wife and all sorts of other things. But then the programmers were able to put parameters around that to prevent it from continuing to occur.
Programmers for that one product, and there are a million
That's right.
doing this.
That's right. Well, so a million people doing this. Many of the new AI solutions, products that you hear about being released, including things like Adobe, are using one of 4 primary large language models in their work. So Google, OpenAI, Anthropic, and then there's a 4th one that escapes me at the moment. Stable, thank you, Stable AI. Which also has Stable Diffusion, which is the image generator that we talked about previously. There may be other large language models in development and working, but most of the avalanche of new products you're hearing about are using one of those, and most of them are using Open AI. So there are only a handful of those. There could be more, obviously, but it takes really smart people doing long-term hard work to pull that off. But OpenAI made their APIs open so that you can build products on top of it. So there's a lot happening, like in the marketing space, for example, automatically generating social posts that are tuned to a brand. I've been using ChatGPT for that for Lirio because I tell it to do it for Lirio.com, so it knows to look at that website and can bring in concepts that are important to our business, like AI and behavioral science and patient engagement and things of that nature. But it is a subset.
So when it comes to like emotion or sentience, consciousness, all these like qualia, I think there's 2 important things to keep in mind. First is we don't actually understand what they are. Emotion, we have some, there's endocrinology and everything else, which you know some about the mechanisms in our brain, but the actual feeling of emotion, we don't have good, don't have good metrics and definitions and everything. And then for sentience, I mean, and consciousness, we have very, very little. We kind of know what people's brains look like when they're unconscious and when they're conscious, but what it actually is, lots of controversy. We will have to know that before we can know whether or not AI are conscious. I would say that right now the systems are simple enough. I mean, as complex of languages the LLMs can create, the actual underlying systems are quite simple, and it's really easy to say, like, there's no reason there's emotion, right? Like, being mechanistically is exactly the same as producing text that correctly explains, how the Earth orbits the sun. And so much as we could look at a human brain and say, like, there's no hormonal release going on, like these neurotransmitters aren't present or whatever, like this person has no emotions because all the things that cause emotion are not there. And obviously the human brain's much more complicated, but for these models right now, it is easy to look behind the curtain and sort of know. But as they get more and more complicated, I don't know how we actually know if something so complicated we can't sort of look at it from the ground up, and then it exhibits things that look like sentience. If we don't actually have a way of defining sentience in ourselves, we have no way of knowing whether or not an AI is sentient.
Excellent. Anybody want to challenge that? I don't. Thought it was a great point. Thank you. I have not tried what you suggested, though, and asked one of these large language models to generate an angry social post or a very negative, aggressive point of view for a blog post or an executive summary or the types of things that I've been using it for. So that's now on my experiment list. So we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, I should be correct. It is actually harder for it to do because it has, there's things that could then prevent it from being too angry or
Yeah.
from being, but it's
Yeah.
the same general idea.
Well, and we're going to get to another movie in a minute that I think starts to get at Mary Palm's question, which is, and you just hinted at, which is, but it's the people controlling the model that you have to worry about, right? All right, you all should know this one. If you don't, you can leave. What is this movie? Terminator, right, okay. I'll be back. All right, so what is the plot line for Terminator and how does AI play a part in it? Anyone? All right, so basically, an AI-based defense system called Skynet becomes self-aware and decides that it should send a robot called a Terminator into the past to defeat the leader of a resistance movement to change the arc of history, if you will. And it's an amazing movie with lots of great special effects and funny turns and whatnot, but it's pretty classic. Now, setting time travel aside, there's 2 or 3 real AI-based concepts in Terminator. The 2 most important, I guess, are this idea of Skynet, and that's actually a common joke when you tell somebody you work at an AI company. They'll often say, "Oh, what are you guys building Skynet?" Like, so it's a known thing. But this AI-based defense system, right? We have missile defense systems that can automatically respond to incoming missiles by shooting them out of the sky, right? But they aren't self-aware and they don't have the ability to, command forces and do things of that nature. But there are elements of that in truth. This is what I meant earlier about the idea that movies reflect what's happening in the real world and not as much vice versa. So that's one concept, and the other, of course, is the robot. In this movie, the robot doesn't have sort of the same smooth human characteristics that the search engine CEO's assistant had. It's a robot. You can tell by its movements, by its voice, by its actions, that it is not human, but it is also incredibly powerful and incredibly intelligent, and is trained specifically to hunt down a person and kill that person, right? So all sorts of implications from, defense and, nation states, but also the functionality of robots and what they're trained to do. Now, this robot in particular, this Terminator, is designed specifically to find and kill a specific human being. And it has this subset. Now, it can do things like, pick up trucks and throw them around and other types of things. So it has human-like capabilities to accomplish that mission, but it's a fairly narrow set of things that it is trained to do. And of course, there's 2 other or 3 other Terminator films. It's a series that spanned about a decade, I think. Really fun movie. All right, and I think this might be our last one. Who knows what this one is? iRobot. It's more recent. I think it's about 5 or 7 years ago, something in that time frame, maybe 2014, 2015 even. Stars Will Smith in a time when, you remember the Future.ai raised $70 million for the humanoid robot to assist humans in everyday life, basically? Well, in Will Smith's time, I don't remember his character's name, in iRobot, those robots exist and are being distributed to the populace. But he is a very skeptical detective and is concerned that his auntie has one of these robots in her home. So the founder of the company that produces these robots dies, and Will Smith's character is sent to investigate that. And he believed, officially the death is ruled a suicide, falling from a high spot in the building that the company is based to his death. But Will Smith believes that it is homicide. And as the story develops, it turns out that he focuses his initiatives on one particular version of these all similar looking robots called Sonny. I do remember that character's name. And who is exhibiting suspicious behaviors. But it goes even further. These are new models of robots to replace older models of robots that are being sent out. And there is a central AI that governs all of these new robots that did not govern all of the old versions of the robots. Now, this story is loosely based on Isaac Asimov's 3 Laws of Robotics, which he used in a number of his books. And in fact, I believe one of the characters in the movie actually may reference the 3 Laws of Robotics. But to paraphrase, the 3 laws of robotics are that robots should not harm humans. 2, that robots should protect themselves so long as it doesn't violate rule number 1. And 3, checking notes, sorry, oh wait, I had that wrong. Law number 2, so don't harm humans, obey human orders so long as it doesn't violate rule number 1. And then the third one is protect self so long as it doesn't violate rules 1 and 2. And I find that a really compelling set of rules for robots. I have no idea how you encode that in them. But what ultimately we discover before the film ends is that it's the central AI that is trying to control behavior, because it has decided that in order to protect humans and protect self, it must basically control the world. So it is now guarding humans. It is rounding up the old robots and putting them in shipping containers, preventing them from doing anything different than what the central AI is doing. So it's this central AI that is the ultimate enemy, the antagonist in the story that must be defeated in order to prevent these robots from controlling humans. And since I'm spoiling all the plots of these movies that you guys may not have seen, A real fun twist is that Will Smith's character actually releases the older robots who are not controlled by the central AI, and they're very helpful in defeating the newer robots and controlling them. All of these movies to me, I've seen them all, saw them all basically when they came out, except 68, since I was born in 66. But I find them all really fascinating in terms of what they put out for us to think about in terms of the development of AI and what some of the implications are. And oh, by the way, it's why everybody goes straight to the scary part, because there's been these massive blockbuster feature films that go to the scary parts. And so it really influences how many of us think about these things, sometimes irrationally. So that's it. That's the discussion around the future that I had prepared, but we have about 9 minutes for additional questions. Thank you for the questions and comments as we went, but what else do you have?
I'd like to know, what is your input? I'm a real big fan of Next Generation Star Trek. And of course, they have data.
Yes.
You know, and then of course it goes into later on, they've now got Patrick Stewart in another series, a spin-off series, and Data developed one of the premises there was that Data had developed emotions to the point where he had family and that sort of thing around. But what I was wondering is, what is the possibility of having, at this point, I'm sure in the future they can do that, but having a humanoid-looking android type with skin and all that sort of stuff? I mean, they must be playing with it to at least get it in some sort of script.
Yeah, so the series is called Star Trek Picard. It's on Paramount Plus. It's 3 seasons. If you did like Star Trek The Next Generation, you will love Star Trek Picard. I count myself among that group of people. A little bit of a Star Trek nut, but it's really, really good if you are interested. If you take a look at future.ai that I showed before, one of the innovations they're really focusing on, of many, because there are many to try to accomplish what they're trying to accomplish, is the skin.
Sorry.
That's right. Is creating a human-like, enclosure for the robotics. Now, you didn't see it in the screenshot I included because they're not there yet, right? You could clearly see a robotic hand in the image that I shared earlier, but they are working on materials that will mimic the human skin in terms of flexibility, pliability, coverage of articulating parts, and all of those types of characteristics. So they are working on it, and I'm sure there are other companies and researchers that are doing so.
It's come a long, long way. I mean, I was at the zoo yesterday, and those dinosaurs, and I know, they're not real dinosaurs because they don't live right now, but if I didn't know that, I might be scared. They really do have a lot of the, not the choppy movements of you think, well, but they're smooth.
Smooth, yeah.
And and the coverings skin mimicking can be hard. So.
Yeah, it's definitely a problem people are trying to solve for sure.
Several years ago, predictive analytics was supposed to help in prevent diseases as opposed to treat diseases.
Yes.
How do you see AI being used to look at data of this kind to actually help us? I mean, in healthcare.
Yeah, healthcare specifically.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of work being done in gene sequencing, right? And there's a much bigger data set of known genes that highly predict future diseases or conditions. So now you can start to scan for those types of things and take action to prevent. I was trying to think of a very specific example, and I'm not coming up with one off the top of my head, but there is a tool for now gene editing as well. So if there's a gene that is highly predictive of a future a disease or condition, you can use a tool called CRISPR, CRISPR, to edit the gene so that it would no longer cause that disease to occur in the future. So that's one way. We were talking before we started today's session, one of the most common uses of AI in healthcare, or one of the earlier uses of AI in healthcare, was in image and pattern recognition. But that's really after, it really doesn't get at what you're asking, because it was about trying to identify cancers in x-rays, for example, like a lung cancer, because it's been trained on what a healthy lung is and what an unhealthy lung is and what a cancer is. And they've been found to be highly accurate in predicting cancers at very early stages, in many cases that radiologists would have missed. And so now radiologists are using tools to help them do a better job of both identifying a problem and designing care pathways to resolve them. What our company is focused on doing is actually, getting people to be more proactive about their own health care, live healthier lives, engage with the health system when they should, and so that you can prevent disease or catch it at least at early stages. So that's the way we're addressing that problem. Those are the three things that immediately come to mind.
Those products, if you were interested, you can look it up on Google, and there's called a citizen science project called Kaggle.
What's it called?
That's all they do. Citizen science projects are doing, they throw 50,000 to 200,000 for people to set up teams that will find those answers.
Interesting. Thank you.
Find what answers?
Whatever the world's problem is.
Citizen science, yeah.
Kind of a question, kind of a statement. So what do you think the role of market forces are in getting things to getting the future of AI in a good place? When you were talking about text-to-speech earlier, which I know is not AI, but that's a good demonstration of like in the day-to-day market that we all kind of participate in, that's come a long way. But like in the education market, our text-to-speech tools for some very big vendors, big database vendors, big digital text vendors, is still very rudimentary. It's very robotic sounding. Like when we have our kids engage, our kids who need things read aloud to them, it's very terrible what we have available to us. And so it seems like things have been kind of funneled and focused on widespread use, but maybe not some of the lower profit margin use.
So it's not surprising, right? Follow the money.
Yeah.
I think you'll see with AI, just like you see with lots of other technologies and solutions, that there are laggards and things often that require public funding lag, and those that have a high profit potential lead. And so I do think that will continue to be the case unless you have something like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation or McKinsey Scott train their sights on AI in education. Then I think that will probably continue to be the case. The good news part of that, of course, is that profit motive is a big motivator and causes companies to create incredible innovation that eventually can permeate, public spheres like the education system. But I don't necessarily expect that to change unless there is a real angel that says we need to really use AI in education. Let's figure it out and let's put a bunch of money behind it. So, which could happen, by the way. I mean, McKinsey Scott, God love her. I mean, she just took that incredible amount of wealth that she got in the divorce and just started spraying it around everywhere. And it's had great impact in the arts and culture and education and lots of areas.
Well, on the parents aspect, there's the actual AI, there is help on there. You can do your 5th grade answers on Wolfgram's Alpha. You can research that or Google it and type in any question from math to science to everything on that. The local aspect was Chat GPT. There's now a home GPT. A realtor over in Seaverville copied that. And so there's that option.
Interesting.
If you, your Adobe NVIDIA created that initial wave on that on their Canvas tool. That's available too as an option.
And NVIDIA's market cap, speaking of market forces driving innovation, just went through the roof. I'll get to you in just a minute, Zach. I had one here.
Mine's kind of long for 1 o'clock, so I'll.
Okay.
I just had a response.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
So for, I just think for more niche applications and niche from a profit perspective, right? So obviously education's huge, but maybe in terms of the amount of like the addressable market or whatever, there's less money there. All those things will, as there's more and more like general purpose models, there'll be more widespread adoption, right? So 10 years ago, if you wanted to do text-to-speech, you had to have a bunch of people that are dedicated to just that, like 10, 15 people. 5 years ago, maybe you need one person who costs a lot of money to spend a year on it. Now it might be like you have a software engineer spend 2 months, right? And then use part of your product. And the people that are already providing the text, right? Just upgrade whatever they have. So I think we'll see, as these general purpose models become more and more available, you'll just see those capabilities go into all sorts of things. As long as there's at least some competition, right? As long as there's a reason to at least have that one engineer spend some time improving things.
So, full disclosure, Zach and I are friends. We used to work together. He used to work with us at Lirio. He's a data scientist that is doing some interesting work himself in healthcare and data and AI. And one of the points he made to me last week was, after our session, was how easy it is to use a solution like OpenAI through their APIs and the large language model to automate things, like step by step tell it to do things. And it's not rocket science, right? That they've made it so simple that non-programmers can do it. And you're seeing a lot of use cases reported about non-programmers actually doing sophisticated programming work, or programmers becoming far more efficient in the work that they do by using, because large language models can see the code, right? If you go to any website today, you can say, show source, and you'll see the source code for that page, right? Well, those large language models can see all of that. So they can actually write code. And so developers are using them in that way. But the main point I wanted to make there was that that Zach has had specific experience using OpenAI's APIs. That's where I trip up. And that maybe a school systems IT leader who wouldn't necessarily have had the capability to do something like that before may be able to do things like that now. And so maybe that will accelerate the transformation of education and others using AI-based solutions when it otherwise wouldn't. Okay, we're at time. I promised if you guys want to share feedback or criticism, one email address I have is PHUNT, so Patrick Hunt, phunt @lirio.co. I think lirio.com will also work. You could also send me directly to jpatrickhunt@gmail.com. And then Mary Palm, you can also reach her through the library systems website if you want to provide feedback to her. But I want to thank you, especially those of you here for all 4 sessions. I appreciate it. I really appreciate the thoughtful questions and discussion. I hope you found it helpful, and maybe we'll find time to do some follow-on types of things in the future with this very rapidly evolving field that impacts all of us every day. So thanks.
Thank you.